in a series we're having on the White Lotus Sutra. And the White Lotus Sutra is amazing, very old sutra, one of the most important bits of kind of literature in the Buddhist tradition. And overall, it's quite mind-blowing. It's like a piece of science fiction. It has characters of hundreds of thousands of people who come from hundreds and thousands of miles away. There's millions of universes in it. There's a flying stupa that's a bit like a kind of object in space. It is quite an extraordinary thing. And within it, there are a number of parables and a number of stories. And we're exploring some of those. So I'm going to be talking about a parable that sometimes gets called medicinal herbs. And that says medicinal, not medieval, medicinal herbs. And, or sometimes it's called the parable of the Raincloud. And actually, interestingly enough, this is a parable that very much comes from the experience, the everyday experience of people who live in India and in other parts of the world where there's a monsoon. So it's not a science fiction kind of one, it's very much based in people's experience. So if you imagine that it has been dry and very hot for a long time, like quite hard to imagine, it's been very dry, very hot for a long time, you've been finding it really hard just to walk about, it's so hot. The ground is very dry, very dusty, there's not much colour. There might be a few trees around, but all the vegetation's died away. The trees maybe have lost their leaves, so it's a very kind of brown, colourless kind of feeling to things. And one day, thunderclouds start to form up in the sky, big thunderclouds. And there's lightning, there's thunder, and you think maybe it's going to rain, maybe at last the monsoon is going to start. And then gradually there's just a few drops of rain falling on you, and then the rain really starts. And as I understand, I haven't been in the monsoon, but as I understand it, it rains like we don't see it here, you know, just like the sky is full of water coming down. And people and animals are so delighted in the rain that they go and stand outside in the rain, and they just enjoy the feeling of the coolness. That they delight in that feeling of standing in the rain and enjoying it after all this time of being in a dry, hot place. And gradually, well in fact quite quickly actually, around you little shoots start to grow, so little bits of green start to grow. And for instance, I've heard that in the desert when it rains, almost overnight the desert will be covered with flowers. It's like the plants all start to respond really quickly to that rain. And soon you're living in a completely different world. You're living in a world of green, of luxuriant foliage, of beautiful red, pink flowers. It's like a completely different world. All these plants have just grown in response to the rain. So that's the story that I'm going to tell in a minute. And I was thinking, how might we relate to that experience? I mean, some people might have lived in a hot place and experienced the monsoon. But if you haven't, what might be similar to us? And I was thinking, actually, that feeling we've had just these last few weeks, when after that long, cold winter, the sun started to come out. And I remember just standing in the sun, kind of basking in it, because it felt so long since I'd felt that feeling of sun on my face. And just really feeling myself kind of opening up, just kind of almost being more awake, more alive, just drinking in the sunshine feeling on me, the warmth, the feeling of the sun on my face. And as you'll have noticed, the plants also really enjoyed that sunshine. They've gone completely crazy. And there's just like, from having been, hardly any plant life around, suddenly it's just everywhere. It's just really beautiful, there's just, and it seems to have all come at once as well, it seems like there are fields of buttercups and fields of dandelions and fields of the cotton grass out in the peak, all at the same time, all looking extraordinarily beautiful. So that's the sense that we're calling up, that's the kind of image that we're calling up in this particular sutra, of this luxuriant life, the diversity of life, responding to the rain or to the sun. So I'm going to read the parable now, and the parable is in two versions. There's a poetry version and a prose version, and I'm going to read bits of the poetry version. And while I do that, we're going to just have some images. And some of these images are from the Sangha here, and some of them are just from the internet. but they're just images of plants. So do you want to get that? Okay, so the sutra says, "It is like unto a great cloud rising above the world, covering all things everywhere, a gracious cloud laden with moisture. Lightning flames flash and dazzle, a voice of thunder vibrates afar, bringing joy and ease to all. The sun's rays are veiled and the earth is cooled. The cloud's masses lower and spread as if to be touched. It rains down equally, descending on all sides, streaming and pouring unstinted, permeating the land everywhere, whether by mountain, stream, river, ravine, or cavern. Wherever grow plants or trees, both great and small, thickets, groves, and bushes, medicinal herbs of many kinds, grapevine and sugar cane, the shoots of the ripening grain, each in its different soils, each with its own name and hue. The rain moistens them all. All are abundantly enriched. The parched ground is soaked. Everywhere herbs and trees grow lush. From that one water which issues from that cloud, plants, trees, thickets, forests, according to need, receive moisture. All the various trees, lofty, medium, low, each according to its size, sprouts and grows, roots, stalks, branches, leaves, blossoms and fruits in their brilliant colours. Wherever the one rain reaches, all become fresh and glossy, according as their bodies, forms, and natures are great or small. In the like manner also the Buddha appears here in the world, like unto a great cloud, universally covering all things. And having appeared in the world, he, for the sake of the living, discriminates and proclaims the truth regarding phenomena." So the Buddha says, "I appear in the world to give rest to every creature, and to the hosts of the living teach the Dharma, pure as sweet dew, of one flavour, the Dharma of deliverance and nirvana. With one transcendent voice, forever unfolding the means for the great way. Upon all I ever look, everywhere impartially. Without distinction of persons, or mind of love or hate, I am without greed or attachment, without limitation or hindrance. Ever to all beings I teach the Dharma equally. Like the all-moistening rain, on honoured and humble, high and low, precept keepers and breakers alike, those of perfect character and those of imperfect, orthodox and heterodox, quick-witted and dull-witted, equally on all I rain down the Dharma, pouring it copiously on the world unwearying." So in this parable, obviously, the rain cloud is the Buddha. The rain is his teaching the Dharma, and the plants are us and all other living beings. And for me, I think what really struck me when I first studied this particular sutra, first read it, was that each plant has its own way of growing. So oaks grow into oaks, rosemary bushes are rosemary bushes, grapevines become grapevines, medicinal herbs are medicinal herbs. The Dharma rains on all of them, and each of them grow into what their nature is to grow into. And that's true of our own development as spiritual beings. We are who we are, not somebody else. So our own conditions will create who we are, who we become. You know, perhaps our genetic structure, or what we've inherited from our parents, our early conditioning, our family life, the society we grew up in, all sorts of things will be giving the conditions that create the kind of person that we are. And as such, I'm going to have certain personality traits, certain characteristics, ways of doing things that come from those conditions. And that's fine, okay? That's absolutely fine. I can grow into whatever those conditions determine, and I can allow other people to grow into what they are as well and not worry about it, okay? They'll be an oak tree and I'll be a rosemary bush, whatever, okay? And actually, the reason I'm kind of going on about this a bit is because it was really important to me. It still is really important to me because there's loads of times when I look at other people and I think, oh, I wish I was like her. Oh, I wish I could do what he can do. And actually, I'm never going to be like her, and I'm never going to be able to do what he can do. I'm going to be me growing into myself, basically, as I practice more. And we might not know what kind of plant we are, and actually it doesn't matter, because you're just going to grow into whatever kind of plant you are. You don't need to know what kind of plant you are. And I don't know, people used to say to me when I was younger, just be yourself. And I used to hate it. I still hate it, actually. I just found it really, really annoying because it's like, didn't know who I was. It was like just being myself. It just really didn't make much sense because I was really aware that I was different people with different other people. I'd behave in a certain way. Hopefully I do that less. Hopefully I'm a bit more integrated now. But in some extent, we just are who we are. We don't need to worry about it. Through our practice of ethics, of meditation, of understanding the Dharma, we'll just naturally become kinder, we'll naturally become more aware. It will happen. Growth is inevitable, and what we need to do is put ourselves in the right conditions so that we experience the right kind of growth, the kind of growth that we want, and then not worry about it, okay? Which is quite hard to do, I suppose, because we do, but if we keep with the plant metaphor, like if there's, I'm trying to grow a flower, there's no point to me when the flower's just starting to come into bud, kind of trying to open it up and make it into a rose. There's no point me taking the rosebud, pulling it apart so it's an open rose. I'll just destroy the flower. And so it is with us. We can't rush the growth. It is an organic process. But plants do need some things to help them grow, or else they wither, they die. And Sangha Night, who's the founder of this Triratna Buddhist movement, he identified 5 things that we need for growth. So the first is the seed. And all of us have the potentiality for enlightenment. All living beings possess the potentiality for enlightenment. Vidania talked about this a few weeks ago. So within us all there is the seed that would allow us to become enlightened. As well as the seed, we need the soil. We need soil with lots of rich manure in it, with lots of things that are going to help us to grow. And the soil is the favourable circumstances that we have. So we may not feel particularly like we have favourable circumstances, but actually in the West we really do. We have leisure, free time, we have the ability to come here, to go on retreat if we want to. We've got access to libraries. We've got access to, the internet with all the, masses of different teachings of the Buddha available on the internet. So it's a bit like we have got a huge amount of good conditions that are available to us. And I think you can kind of compare that perhaps to some of our other people in our Sangha in India who don't have such good conditions, who don't perhaps have, enough money to pay the bus to go to their Buddhist centre. We find it hard because of family commitments to get away on retreat ever. It's like, these can be situations that people find in the West as well, but I think we tend to have it a lot easier than they do in India. There's a story of a woman in India, quite an elderly woman, who wanted to go on a retreat, which even though it only cost the equivalent of a few pounds, she went to work as a labourer for a month, moving stones about, so that she could go on the retreat. And although we might find it hard to go on retreat, there's not many of us who've had to go and do the equivalent of working as a labourer for a month to do that. Okay, so as well as these favourable circumstances, this soil, this plant needs warmth. So we need the warmth of spiritual friendship. And we need teachers, but we might not be able to be in touch with the teachers all the time. So we need just ordinary human friendship, that just warmth, affection that we get from being around other people. And we need light. A plant needs light. And Sangha Night saw this as being clarity of thought. So we need intellectual clarity about what it is that the Dharma is. And he felt that it's really important that the Dharma the aim of the Dharma as it falls from the sky doesn't become acid rain, as he called it. He said it needs to be pure rain, non-polluted rain. And by that he means not polluted by other ideas that aren't actually the Dharma. And he gives an example of in China. I think scholars have argued that Buddhism in China to some extent adopted too much of Confucius type philosophy, which meant that people were very much thinking about their next life rather than what was happening in this life. And that really affected the way that Buddhism was seen in China. Or you might say here that we might have some problems with, we might feel that a few kind of psychotherapeutic type things look very much like the Dharma. And we need to make sure that actually, well, the difference between, psychotherapy is brilliant, it helps us to become happier, but it's not radical. It's not about finding a radically different way of being in the world. And if we allow the kind of, that side of things to get too involved with what we do, it will dilute the Dharma. It will no longer be a radical alternative way of looking at the world. It will just become another method for us to become happier. Good to be happy, but better if we can have this kind of radically different way of looking at the world. Okay, so I've been talking about plants growing, us growing as spiritual beings, and this sense of the kind of, the exuberance, the extravagance of all the plants in the world. The fact there are so many different ones, they're so beautiful, they just grow, it's amazing, and people are like that too. But what does it mean as a person to grow spiritually? Well, I think for me, it means to become more awake, to wake up a bit, to be more in touch with reality, and to behave more in line with reality, not just to know about it intellectually, but to actually start to behave more in line with reality. It means to become more aware, to become kinder. In essence, it means to overcome that small mind, that ego-clinging mind that's always thinking of things, what can I get out of this, all about me, and to let go, to overcome that mind, and to become free of it, and to become part of something bigger. Something that's more about, reflects the reality of us all being interconnected. In the way that plants are interconnected, of course, we can see that very clearly in the ecosystem of plants. We are an ecosystem too. We are interconnected. And this process can be framed in terms of the phrase, going for refuge. So the rest of today's talk, I'm going to talk about what going for refuge means. And going for refuge is a phrase that gets bandied around Buddhists a lot. I think presumably all Buddhist groups will have going for refuge as a concept. It's a very key concept in Buddhism. And, but it's kind of one that needs a little bit of, for me actually, going for refuge just as a phrase doesn't quite convey what it's about. So it needs a little bit of unpacking. And in pujas, and perhaps if you come here in the morning to meditation, or perhaps at home anyway, you might say the refuges and precepts. And when we say the refuges, what we're doing is it's about expressing our going for refuge. So we'll say, Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. And what that means is... Well, go on, I'll do some interactive teaching then. What does that mean? It means, to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. Okay. So, I think to understand this more, to understand the feeling behind this, it's worth going back to the days of the Buddha and thinking a bit about him in his time. So, briefly, the story of the Buddha is that he was born into a very privileged, wealthy family, a powerful family. And he was given all that money could buy, and lots of love as well. He was very loved. You could almost imagine him, if he was born today, he'd be born into a kind of banking family. Vedanya uses this kind of idea. He'd be born as the sign of a banking family, meant to kind of carry on the business, given everything, the best education, a flat in London and a place in St. Moritz and somewhere in New York, that kind of way of living, The Buddha had palaces for different times of the year. And he had, everything that was seen to be what he wanted at that time. But he was dissatisfied. He became dissatisfied. And he left his home and he set off to become a homeless wanderer. And actually at that time, quite a few people left home to become homeless wanderers. It was a bit like in the 60s, but people kind of gave up their lives and hit the road in search of something different. So a bit like people doing that at that time, and the Buddha did that too. And he went to some very good teachers, learned what he could from them, but after some time he realised that he wasn't actually breaking through as far as he could. So he sat in meditation, and in meditation he made the final breakthrough. He saw reality as it really was. He became fully enlightened. And after that experience, he had some time to absorb it, and then he spent the rest of his life, 50 years or so, walking around northern India, southern Nepal, and just teaching whoever he met. So sometimes he taught in huge, great groups of people, sometimes he just bumped into somebody on the road. And he met every kind of person. So he met kings and queens, courtesans, lepers, thieves, murderers, housewives, philosophers. It's like in the stories of the Pali Canon, you'll just see him coming again and again in touch with different people. And some of these people, not all of them, but some of them, were just really struck by something about him. And they would engage in conversation with him, perhaps ask him a particular question. And then they'd have a quick, a brief discussion or a long discussion with the Buddha. And after some time, the person might say this particular phrase. And it's repeated quite a lot in the canon. So the phrase is, "Magnificent Lord, magnificent," just as if he were to place upright what was overturned, to reveal what was hidden, to show the way to one who was lost, or to carry a lamp into the dark so that those with eyes could see forms. In the same way has the Blessed One, through many lines of reasoning, made the Dharma clear. I go to the Blessed One for refuge, to the Dharma and to the community. May the Blessed One remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge from this day forward for life. So you get the strong sense there of people seeing something in the Buddha that they want. They want to be like the Buddha is. He talks to them, and then whatever it is that he says, whatever it is, they say, I want to go to refuge, to you, to your teaching, and to your community. And because we don't have the phrase going for refuge in our time, it's interesting to think, what are these people doing? I think they're saying they want to learn something from him. They want to be like him. There's something he can offer. I think because they're using very direct images to communicate a sense of, now there's a sense of rightness, where before things were chaotic. Something that was hidden has been revealed. They were lost in the wilderness of life, and now there is a purpose. And that's what the effect of meeting the Buddha, talking with the Buddha had. But it's interesting to think perhaps what our own images or metaphors for a similar experience might be. So, for instance, I very much felt when I first came across the teachings of the Dharma, I felt like those plants that had been without water. I felt, it's like there was a sense of opening up in me, of drinking it up. I wanted to drink up the teachings. I wanted to immerse myself in it, to bathe in it, to feel my parched and dehydrated self just kind of opening up and blossoming. So that was my response to the Dharma, to the teaching. For many people, they have a response to the Sangha or to the Buddha, which is a feeling of coming home. A feeling of, this is my place, these are my people, this is where I want to be. These are people who are speaking my language. These are just my kind of people. And I think I did have this sense of recognition, but I was very hesitant about it actually, because I think I was quite tender around, I really wanted a community that I could belong to, and I felt quite tender about being part of it. So it took me quite a long time to be sure that actually this community, with all its imperfections, was going to be, do its best to be that place where the Buddha's Dharma was lived out as much as we can. So yeah, maybe interesting just to think and talk about in the group if you want to, what kind of images or metaphors you might have for coming across the Buddha, the Dharma or the Sangha. Okay. So I think that, even though we can't meet the Buddha as he was. We can't have that experience probably that people seem to have when they met the Buddha. We're not that different really from those people. Because actually they were seeking for something perhaps. Or when they met the Buddha, they knew that there was something different. And we also may have a nagging sense that things just aren't right. We try a million different ways to make them right, but they're still just not right. And we have a feeling there must be a freer, a much more creative way of being in the world. And I think that feeling is something to really pay attention to, actually, that feeling of there might be a different way of doing it. However, with that feeling, it's important to be aware that the nature of human life is that we can't fix it. Okay? That is the nature of human life. So those Buddhist words, impermanence, insubstantiality, unsatisfactoriness, get used a lot. But basically what they mean is that the nature of things can seem sometimes a bit rubbish, really. More than a bit rubbish. You know, it's like, nature of being a human being is that I will die. I'm getting old. I don't like getting old. I get ill. I don't like it. People I know die, which I really don't like. They get old. They change. People move away. People I love leave me. You know, it's just, there are lots of, the world is changing. I'm enjoying spring at the moment, but it will be autumn and winter in not too many few months' time. You know, it's just like there is continual impermanence in the world. And the Buddha suggests that we really take the feelings of dissatisfaction that we have in the world seriously and that we pay attention to them. Sangha says, dissatisfaction, if it is not just disgruntlement, but a genuine and creative mood of inner revolt, is a positive and powerful impulse. Indeed, such a mood is the starting point. So I'll just read that again because I love it. Anyway, dissatisfaction, if not just disgruntlement, but a genuine and creative mood of inner revolt, is a positive and powerful impulse. Indeed, such a mood is the starting point. So next time you just think this is really rubbish and it shouldn't be like this, don't turn to the DVD or the chocolate cake, but use it as the starting point to make some kind of change. Yeah, because we have dissatisfaction, and actually at the heart of things we have a deep insecurity. And we're quite right to feel really insecure, because we are very insecure. You know, as I've just said, we will die, we will get ill. That sense of insecurity is actually an appropriate feeling to have, but it's a really, really difficult feeling to have. And it's one that we want to just get rid of all the time. We want to really kind of create things that make us feel that we have an identity, that we're somebody, that we exist in some kind of a permanent way. And we just really try so hard. In my own experience at the moment, because I'm in the horrible process of the ending of a very long relationship, and I can feel this sense of anxiety and insecurity comes over me. Far more anxiety than I think the situation I'm in deserves. And I think it is in some ways that existential anxiety, the insecurity that I'm feeling. And my tendency is to immediately want to get rid of it because it's really painful, and to I just want to get rid of it, and I do turn to DVDs and chocolate as a very good way of doing that. But if I can stay with it, if I can experience it, how it feels in my body, and stay with that feeling, I can start to realise that is actually how things are. And not just me, but everybody else is in that same situation. And when I allow myself to do that, for instance, I'm walking about town and I allow myself to look around and see people, and I think they too are suffering just like I suffer. Actually, we all have this terrible sense of insecurity, of fear. Of course we do. We're impermanent beings, and we do all we can to run away from it. And of course we do that as well. But what the Buddha is saying to us is he's saying there's a radical different way of doing things. What we can actually do is we can face those fears, and we can learn to develop compassion for ourselves and for other beings as well. All of us in the same fix that we find ourselves. And I think perhaps that was part of the reason that when people met the Buddha, it was such a powerful experience, because I imagine that he was very steady. He wasn't afraid. He knew that we are, our bodies are impermanent. He knew it and he was okay with it. He knew that we suffer, people suffer, and he was fine with it. So I imagine that being with him felt very kind of, you know, that sense of steadiness you get off people who are just kind of very relaxed, very steady people. It can just be really lovely to be with a person like that. And I'm sure that was part of the power of the Buddha when you met him. Okay, so we live in this very insecure world, and what do we do with those feelings? Well, we stay with them, but I think also we look for things that can bring us true and lasting happiness. And that is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that's why we say, I go for refuge. It's that feeling of having seen the vision of a different kind of way, and actually going for our refuge, for our security, to the Buddha and his teachings and his community. Chogyam Trungpa said, we are spiritual refugees, which I think is an interesting idea. It's like the more we turn away from those kind of conventional ways of trying to find refuge in things that aren't going to actually give us any refuge, they can't give us security, because they are impermanent and they change. As we turn away from those, we do become in some ways a bit homeless, and we need to find another home, a positive home, one that we're going to be able to find true refuge in. Yes, so the idea of a refuge. Now it's interesting that it's not a particular strong idea in the West, I don't think. I imagine that in India 2,500 years ago, people did have a very strong sense of their insecurity, as probably people do in India now, you know, where there's not a welfare state, where there's, if your family can't support you, you could definitely die on the streets, and that could happen to you. I mean, we do have a, you know, we are more supported, so we don't have such a strong sense of insecurity. But I was thinking what a refuge means to me, and I think one of the sort of strongest images I have of it is one time when I went walking for a few days in the mountains, and I was going from mountain refuge to mountain refuge. And I remember one day when it started snowing, a lot of snow came in, and I was carrying a really heavy pack, and I was really tired, and I could see the lights of the refuge twinkling in the distance. And I knew that when I got in there, I'd be warm, they'd give me food, I'd be able to lie in my bed, you know. That was my refuge. And I think for me, when I can have the sense of, you know, the Dharma being like a refuge for me, it's the light twinkling in the distance that will give me a place where I can find some rest, something from the kind of the winds blowing about, the snow blowing about. I think for some people, they find their homes a refuge, which is quite interesting. They might find particular relationships a refuge, friendship a refuge. Perhaps it's quite interesting to think, what does refuge mean to you? What kind of connotations does it have for you? So in the Buddhist tradition, going for refuge is an act, and it represents our response to the spiritual ideal. So as I've said, we have this vision of the Buddha, his teaching, his community. And what we say is we go for refuge to it. And it's actually a symbolic act that probably all Buddhists do. They chant the refuges in their practice, as we do. It's a fundamental and basic act of the spiritual life, it's been described as. Sangha, the founder of this movement, has actually drawn particular attention to going for refuge as particularly what it is that makes us Buddhists. And he's described that there are different levels. So you don't just go for refuge once, you gradually deepen your going for refuge. And there's the kind of cultural and ethnic Buddhists, so Buddhists who maybe grow up in, I don't know, Sri Lanka or Thailand, who've been grown up as Buddhists. They may say the refuges quite regularly, but they might not mean anything to them. It might just be a cultural thing. So there might be a kind of cultural and ethnic going for refuge. So far, there aren't that many Westerners who've been brought up as Buddhists, but there are a few. And so for them, it would be like whether they say going for refuge, feel going for refuge is actually something they mean or just something they do. The second kind of going for refuge is provisional. So this is where, gradually our going for refuge deepens. So we're very interested in living the spiritual life. We're quite interested in the community. We perhaps love the ideal of the Buddha. We love some of the teachings, and we want to try it out. So that might be, often when people become mitras, that might be seen very much as a provisional going for refuge. It's like, from what you know so far, it looks pretty good, but you just want to kind of try it out. You want to commit to something and see what it's like. The next level is called effective going for refuge. So this is where we really, with as much of us as we can, we really want to practice the Dharma in our lives. Whatever our lifestyle might be, we want to make our practice at the centre of our lifestyle. So we want to follow the footsteps of the Buddha, but we haven't actually had any major breakthroughs. It's not like we kind of see it or live it, but it's like it is very much the centre of our lives. And even if we drift away, we know about it, and we come back, hopefully. And then there's a real going for refuge, and that's actually what equivalent to stream entry, to insight. That's when we see reality as it is. We have the experience of seeing reality, and for us, then, for people who've experienced that, faith in the three jewels is then unshakable. It's they've had a clear vision of the transcendental. They see things as it is. So that's what real going for refuge is. So that's what all of us as practitioners are aiming for. But I don't think it stops there. I don't know, but I don't think it does. I think it's like, going for refuge is a continuous journey. It's a continuous deepening. It's an eternal journey into the mysterious, it's been described as. And eventually, we will become those refuges ourselves. So we become, we transform into being the refuges ourselves. So how will it look from the outside, externally? How does it look going for refuge? Well, I think for every person it looks different. So just like every plant and every flower, the redwoods grow into redwoods and the little moss grows into little moss, it will look different for all of us. And it'll take different shapes in different contexts. So for some of us, going for refuge might look like we work in a Buddhist right livelihood business, or it might be that we work as a teacher, a nurse, a doctor. We work in the world. We don't work at all. Quite good, just we don't work at all, and we spend our life kind of in seclusion, meditating. It might look that we might live in a community, or we might live on our own. We might live in a family situation. Lots of different ways that we might live. We might be married in a partnership. We might lead a celibate lifestyle. We might be caring for children, caring for our parents, or all sorts of different ways we might be living. So really there's many different ways of living as there are people. And what's at the heart of going for refuge is that it's the process for us of moving towards what is becoming more and more important to us, of really having it at the heart of our lives. So for me that is moving towards that beautiful ideal of Buddhahood. So the ideal of the Buddha of being awake, someone who is awake, someone who is real, who's truly kind and who's truly free. Moving towards his teaching, the Dharma. So that's the teachings of freedom, the teachings of wisdom and compassion. And moving towards participating in and creating a community, the Sangha, in which those ideals, however imperfectly, can actually be manifested and realised.